Yeah, I think you just called me out a little bit, didn't you? So I want to introduce you to my friend Gina Goodgame. Gina is a dietitian. She's been of help to me personally, to my family, and to several pastors and leaders on various retreats we've had the privilege of working together on over the last few years. So, Gina, would you tell my friends a little bit about yourself and maybe throw in there what's the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
Well, my name's Gina Goodgame, and I am a dietitian, which means that, I went to a 4-year university. I went to the University of Texas and studied nutrition, and then I completed a 1,200-hour internship through the University of Houston, where you work in all the different fields of nutrition, getting experience, and then I sat for an exam.
What do you do for your work as a dietitian?
I work in a pediatrician's office, and I primarily see obese patients, so pediatric obesity, but I see a mixture of babies and gastrointestinal things and all the different stuff. But my primary focus is helping kids to achieve a healthy weight.
That's great. And you have been in ministry in various forms. You and your husband were missionaries for a little bit. Tell us about that.
So we got married and moved a week later to Tanzania and lived there for 3 years. We were with Young Life Africa. And then we came back to Houston in 2009.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for taking time to talk about food and our bodies and movement and rest as spiritual practices today. I think this will be a gift to everybody who's listening as a part of the Well-Being of Pastors initiative. So, first of all, why do you care about the body?
Well, we only get one. We only get one body. And Scripture tells us that our body is our temple. When we invite Jesus into our heart, it's our body. We serve Him with our whole being. So it's a piece of that, mind, body, spirit. And I think that how we care for our body is often how we feel in general. It's all related.
How we feel about...
Well, how we feel might affect how we eat, and how we eat might affect how we feel. And there's this emotional kind of circle that can be go round and round until we identify the pieces that we get stuck in sometimes. I kind of say that we eat how we feel, and we feel how we eat. We get kind of in these circles.
And I imagine that can spiral upward or spiral downward.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, a related question, how are eating, and I'll ask you about movement and rest too, perhaps in a moment, but how is eating a spiritual practice?
It can be a time that we pause. I think that pause and reflect and give thanks, that we become aware of both how we're feeling in our bodies. But I think that eating and I would say nutrition, movement, and rest can all be spiritual practices, because it's again how we're living out in the world.
Yeah. So oftentimes when I think of spiritual practices in my younger years, I would think of extra things I was adding to my already busy life. But one of the things I like about thinking of eating and movement and rest as spiritual practice, as spiritual practices, is that these are things I'm already doing. They're a normal part of my life, and yet I can do these things with more awareness in relationship to God, and that really changes things for me.
I think calling them spiritual practices helps bring that awareness in, because it's not just eating. You think of it as, okay, it's an invitation to steward your body well and meet with the Lord in that moment.
Yeah.
Same thing for movement. It isn't just getting out there and exercising, which is good, but it's also a time for us to pause and reflect and just zone out if you need to just zone out and have a moment to breathe a little bit.
Yeah. So I've heard you say the word awareness. That seems to be important in thinking of eating and movement and rest as a spiritual practice. Why is awareness an important part of this?
Awareness is important because we live in a multitasking world, and we're not aware. We walk by a bowl of candy, we take a bite. We walk by a bowl of peanuts, we don't even know they went in our mouth. We're very unaware of those kinds of things, or even how much time we waste if we're sitting in our bed on our phone looking at Facebook before we go to bed. We're unaware that we might have just lost an hour of sleep or maybe good reading time.
That's good. So awareness for what's happening inside, but how that's affecting us, our bodies, our lives. So this awareness can make these very simple body stewarding activities a spiritual practice. I noticed you also said the word stewardship of our body makes these three practices really important. Could you say a little more about that?
I think it's just caring for ourselves and having permission to care for ourselves. And also the command to care for ourselves. But so often we put ourselves last in terms of our body. So we serve people, we meet with people, we take care of our kids, we take care of the house, we do all the different tasks that we have to do, and with no self-care. And so then we're eating a granola bar, and we're not exercising, and we're not sleeping well because we're staying up late because we haven't done our tasks. So I think it all is interrelated.
Now, most people watching this aren't going to immediately say, oh, well, that's selfish to steward the body, but in some ways, some of us who grew up with the idea of joy, Jesus, others, and you last, it's sort of the self-deprecating that almost somewhere within us spiritually there's a conflict where we say, oh, if I begin to care for myself, that can be selfish. How is this not selfish?
If you don't care for yourselves, you're not going to be around to care for others, both around physically and also emotionally. If we don't care for ourselves, then we might start to feel sick, and then if you start to feel sick, then that's going to knock you out of the game. Or we might come across depression or depressed moods, and that affects also how you relate to people. But if you take a few minutes, it's not hours and hours, it's just being present in some of those key times of day.
So the way it comes out of my mouth occasionally is self-stewardship for the sake of mission, or self-care for the sake of sacrifice. It's the orientation of my life is for the glory of God and the good of other people. So what I do here is for the sake of giving it away. I think we see it clearly with our money, but here I hear you saying it in terms of how we care and steward our bodies. Yeah.
I agree.
I've heard you talk about eating. We can conceive eating as a spiritual practice. How might movement be thought of as a spiritual practice?
Same things. It's a time that we can pull aside, reflect, see it as an invitation. I've oftentimes will encourage people that you make an appointment with yourself. Like, I'm going to exercise, or I'm going to go for a walk. And some people listen to worship music, and it's a time for them to praise the Lord. Or some people just want to put on hip hop and go for it. And it's time just to have fun and re-energize. But all of those things, whether you listen to worship music or you go to a hip hop class, there's lots of different forms of movement, but it just helps us to re-engage.
Re-engage, refocus, recenter. And it does things for our bodies,
right.
Obviously.
Releases endorphins, all the things that most people know. It releases endorphins. It makes us feel better. It pumps the blood. Sometimes we really think that we need it. We're so tired, but I've heard someone say that we're tired from the neck up. We come home from work, and our bodies are not tired. Our bodies have been sitting in a chair for a lot of people, not everybody, but we need to, once we get out there, we just make that commitment, say, I'm going to get out there and move in some form or fashion. We don't feel as tired. It re-energizes us.
Yeah, I think
being outside, fresh air, vitamin D. or socially in community, in a class. People need it in different ways.
A lot of our work, often is with people. We're engaged in some form of study, preparation. And so I resonate with what you're saying about we're tired from the neck up. At the end of the day, I'm often exhausted mentally, emotionally, but it sounds like that could be a way to engage and even combat some of the tiredness to get my body moving. Now, exercise for me at the end of the day, as you've heard me talk about, is harder personally than at the beginning of the day. So it seems to me finding rhythms that fit our lives and when that fits more naturally for each of us might be different, I would think.
Right.
What would you say about that as a trainer?
I think you need to know your own excuses. So being aware of all your top 5 reasons for you not to do it that day. And then have that statement ready for yourself to get over it.
Yeah, I think you just called me out a little bit, didn't you? Yeah. So being aware of our excuses, being aware of our schedule, what will work for us.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you've committed to yourself to exercise and you didn't do it in the morning, then that only leaves the afternoon. So,
okay.
Kris, you can exercise in the afternoon.
All right, moving on. Now, let's talk about resting our body. If moving our bodies, if fueling our bodies, resting our bodies also can be thought of as a spiritual practice. Talk to us about that a little bit.
I think rest quiets the soul. Rest can be active even. I mean, rest doesn't mean that you have to be sitting down or sleeping even. You can be at rest, I think, even if you're outside walking and you're just breathing. But rest also rejuvenates us. It's a time that we put up those boundaries and kind of say, hey, this is the time for me to refuel and to take what I need so that I can keep giving. And maybe that, obviously we need sleep, and if we don't sleep, then that throws off our hormone levels, which makes us crave more junky foods, sweet, salty foods. I think if people were to really look at their food tracking with sleep, they would notice a pattern of like, man, I slept 3 hours last night, and all I want today is Chinese food. Not that Chinese food is bad, but carbs or salty, or it might be different for different people. But sleep restores the body. We need to sleep.
So I hear you pointing out the interrelationship between our sleeping and our eating and perhaps our movement.
Yeah. If you don't sleep, then you're not going to eat well, which affects whether or not you're going to want to exercise. So it all goes in a circle, and they're all important, and equally important, I would say.
And what becomes important for me is everything I do, every interaction with another person, with the Lord in all things, when I'm by myself, all of it I do as a body. So these 3 spiritual practices seem really important for pretty much everything I do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening to this video on how spiritual practices such as eating, our movement, and our resting can be a part of our well-being and enjoying life with God and helping us to live well and serve Him. Gina, thanks for coming and talking.